I used to think the worst part of living in an HOA neighborhood was getting that smug newsletter in the mail every month. You know the one: pastel colors, cheesy clip art, a passive-aggressive reminder about lawn heights, and a quote about community spirit while quietly telling you what you're doing wrong. Turns out, I was wrong about the worst part. The worst part is when your neighbor's teenage son decides your freshly renovated backyard pool is his personal water park, and his mother just happens to be a lawyer with a god complex and a track record of turning petty disputes into full-scale legal crusades. I'm not saying locking my gate was the smartest move, but I sure as hell didn't expect it to trigger a live-streamed legal ambush to thousands of strangers, turning me into the neighborhood villain overnight. Yeah, it gets messy. But stick around, because the twist? It's wild. And hey, if you've ever had to deal with someone like this in your neighborhood, drop your stories in the comments. I read every single one. Welcome to QA Stories. I'm Marcus Bell. I'm 35 years old, divorced, and I work as an insurance adjuster specializing in property damage claims, the kind of job where you see people at their worst on their worst days. You'd think a job like that would have taught me to be careful with my own property, to plan for worst-case scenarios, to think 2 steps ahead. Turns out, you can know every clause of a policy and still get blindsided by the people living right next door. The thing about divorce is that it rips your life apart in slow motion. One day you're arguing about how to load the dishwasher, and the next you're standing alone in a mostly empty house, splitting coffee mugs, deciding who gets which streaming service, and realizing the silence isn't peaceful, it's suffocating. My ex-wife and I had been married for 8 years, and when it ended, I walked away with a house in a neighborhood that looked quiet enough, plus exactly $18,347 in my savings account. It was literally half of what I had left in the world. The house came with a pool, though calling it a pool was generous. It was a crater of cracked concrete, green water, rust-stained ladders, and the faint smell of algae and broken dreams. I remember standing there in that first week post-divorce, looking at it, feeling like it was a metaphor for everything I was going through. But also, I thought maybe, just maybe, it could be a fresh start. The insurance business taught me that a good pool could add serious resale value, and if I was going to claw my way back, I'd need every advantage I could get. Plus, I worked from home, so I'd actually get to enjoy it on those sweltering summer days. So I called a pool contractor. He gave me the rundown: new liner, upgraded filtration, deck resurfacing, chemical balancing, the works. The grand total? $18,200. That left me with $147 to my name, which wasn't enough to cover even a grocery run, but I figured, what the heck, right? If I was going to bet on something, it might as well be myself. The contractor came out a few days later, measuring the deep end, chatting with me about filtration systems and pH levels. Then, almost casually, he said, "Someone's been swimming here." I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he pointed to wet towel marks on the fence and that faint chlorine smell in the air I hadn't noticed before. He explained he'd been doing this for 20 years and could spot the signs. At first, I brushed it off. The pool had been drained for months. Who would be using it? But after that conversation, I started noticing things I should have caught earlier. Wet footprints around the deck in the mornings, the faint slush of water late at night when I was in my office, the chemical levels dropping faster than they should, even with the new system. It felt like I was being watched, like someone was slipping through the fence while I was inside working, quietly claiming what I had just spent every last cent renovating. Then, one afternoon, she showed up. Patricia Williams. She arrived with an official-looking clipboard and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the kind of smile that says, "I'm about to ruin your day, but I'm going to do it politely." She introduced herself as the HOA president with a tone like I should applaud. Apparently, pool installations required documentation for compliance with neighborhood guidelines. Funny how I'd been living there for 6 months, and this was the first I was hearing about it. She had this way of speaking that wrapped legal threats in suburban sweetness, asking pointed questions about my contractor, my permits, my fence lines. Every question felt like a landmine, and the entire time, I felt like I was being sized up, like she already knew the answers and was just waiting for me to slip. While she was talking, I noticed a teenage boy watching us from an upstairs window across the street. Dark hair, maybe 16, eyes sharp with that smug confidence only teenagers and sociopaths seem to possess. When I waved, he smirked and disappeared behind the curtain. "Is that your son?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Her expression flickered, protective and cold. "That's Brandon," she said. "He's very interested in neighborhood activities." The way she said it sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't proud mom energy, it was a warning. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that her visit wasn't random. My insurance background had taught me that documentation is everything, so I called a security company the next morning and spent $800. I didn't have to install 4 cameras covering every angle of the pool and fence line. The technician thought I was paranoid. Most people install these after a break-in, he said. You're trying to prevent one. He wasn't wrong. The first night the cameras were live, they caught Brandon by my fence, just standing there, studying the setup, testing the latch, walking the perimeter like he was memorizing blind spots. The footage made my skin crawl. This wasn't curiosity, it was reconnaissance. The next day, while I was working from home, I heard a voice call out, "Sweet setup, dude. Mind if I take a dip?" I looked out the window, and there he was, leaning against my gate like he owned it, phone in hand, recording everything. I went outside, trying to stay calm. "You should probably ask your mom first," I said, attempting a neighborly tone. His eyes went cold. "I don't need to ask anyone," he said, and walked away, leaving me with the sinking realization that I'd just painted a target on my back. The following day, I returned from a client meeting to find 6 teenagers in my pool, music blasting, their phones recording every moment. Brandon was directing it like a low-budget movie set, telling his friends where to jump, how to splash, which angles to film. I stood there, stunned, then called out, "Guys, this is private property." Brandon looked at me with that smirk again. "Chill, we're making content," he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. One of his friends, bleach blonde hair, fake gold chain, the kind of kid who thought Grindset was a personality, actually laughed. "Don't be a Karen, old man." Old man. I'm 35. But what got me wasn't the laughter or the music, it was Brandon's complete disregard for the fact that this was my pool, my property, my $18,000 renovation. I snapped. "Everyone out. Now." What I didn't know was that Brandon was live streaming the entire thing to over 50,000 followers on a social media app I'd never even heard of. Within an hour, there was a video online titled, "Crazy Neighbor Tries to Kick Us Out of Community Pool." Community pool. They made it sound like I was evicting children from a public park, not teenagers trespassing on my property. My face was everywhere, plastered across videos with comments calling me unhinged, calling for people to find my address, to get me fired, to teach me a lesson. One person threatened to come by and take a swim whether I liked it or not. Another claimed they'd leave bad reviews for my insurance business. I became the villain in a story I didn't even know was being filmed, and I couldn't do a damn thing about it. The next morning, I found an official letter from the HOA in my mailbox. Cream-colored paper, sharp letterhead, Patricia Williams, Esquire, signed at the bottom in looping ink. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just the HOA president, she was a practicing attorney. A quick search of her name at 2 a.m. turned my blood cold. Harassment lawyer, 3 settled lawsuits, all in our development. Her law firm's website had testimonials from clients she'd helped fight back against neighborhood bullies. There was even a local newspaper article, "HOA President Wins Settlement Against Neighbor Harassment." I dug deeper and found forums with stories from neighbors who tried to fight back, only to end up drained from legal fees or forced to move. It was a pattern: provoke, document, sue, settle. And now, I was in her crosshairs, all because I wanted to protect my pool, my investment, and my peace. That's how it started. A kid sneaking into my pool turned into a live-streamed public shaming, which turned into a legal threat from a lawyer neighbor with a reputation for bleeding people dry in court. I wasn't prepared for what came next. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going down without a fight. The past 2 years. That's how long Patricia Williams had been running this neighborhood like her personal courtroom, systematically targeting neighbors one by one. Fence disputes, noise complaints, landscaping violations, petty boundary disagreements, each escalated into a lawsuit, each settled quietly for undisclosed amounts, and each neighbor moved out within months. I found forums and local Facebook groups littered with warnings about her, stories from people who had once tried to stand up but ended up drained, defeated, or gone. The pattern was crystal clear now, and it wasn't random teenage misbehavior or harmless TikTok stunts. It was a system, a machine Patricia ran with cold precision, and her son was a piece on her board, moved strategically to provoke, film, and document reactions for the next legal ambush. And now, for reasons I couldn't fully understand, I was the latest target. Why me? Why my pool, my house, my quiet life? What made my property worth this level of harassment and manipulation? Was it because I was new here? Because I was alone and still reeling from a divorce? Or maybe, as an insurance adjuster, I was supposed to know better, and Patricia saw an opportunity to break someone who prided themselves on always being prepared. Whatever the reason, the property damage started piling up fast. First, it was the pool filter housing, cracked clean through like someone had stomped on it or hit it with a heavy object. The replacement cost me $400, money I didn't have but had to spend if I wanted to keep the water clean and circulating. Then, the decorative tiles around the pool, the ones I had chosen specifically to make the space feel like a retreat, were cracked in 3 different places. Another $300 gone. The electronic gate latch, which I had installed for security after the first break-in, was snapped and hanging loose, wires dangling like veins. $150 for a new one, and another dent in the credit card I was desperately trying to keep under control. Each incident was a gut punch, a reminder that I wasn't safe in my own home. But I documented everything. Every crack, every receipt, every repair bill. My training as an insurance adjuster was a lifeline, giving me a small illusion of control in a situation that was spiraling rapidly beyond it. But there's something they don't tell you about working in claims for a living. You get so used to measuring damages and calculating losses that you forget the emotional cost. I found myself glancing at my mailbox with suspicion, wondering if the neighbors who smiled at me were secretly judging me, if the ones who avoided eye contact believed the narrative Brandon was spinning on social media. Some days, I thought maybe I was becoming the monster they claimed I was. A few neighbors approached me quietly, in hushed tones while they walked their dogs or checked their mail. "We're with you, but we can't say it publicly." One older woman, frail and trembling, whispered to me that Patricia had destroyed the Hendersons last year over a fence dispute, leaving them bankrupt and forced to sell their house at a loss. "Don't get involved with the Williams family," she said, eyes darting toward Patricia's house as if the walls themselves might report her betrayal. Others, though, fully bought into Brandon's social media circus. They gave me cold stares, conversations would die when I approached, and kids on bikes would swerve to the other side of the street while glaring at me, their parents watching silently from porches. It was like living in a small-town mob drama, but instead of pitchforks and torches, it was smartphones and social media shame. Then came the worst realization: insurance wasn't going to save me. My agent explained, with that cautious tone that always precedes bad news, that repeated trespassing and property damage incidents could affect my coverage. "You need to secure the property," he said firmly. "If someone gets injured during these incidents, your liability coverage might not apply if it's determined you didn't take reasonable steps to prevent unauthorized access." My $18,000 pool investment was at risk, but now I was looking at the possibility of unlimited liability if one of these kids hurt themselves while trespassing. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, realizing the ground beneath me was crumbling. That evening, Brandon posted a new video. "Pool War Part 2, coming tomorrow," he announced, grinning into the camera while fireworks crackled in the background. He promised a bigger party, more friends, louder music, better content. The video racked up 20,000 likes in a few hours, 20,000 strangers hyped to watch a man get torn down for trying to protect his home. I sat in my kitchen that night, surrounded by piles of insurance policy documents, receipts, and screenshots from social media, trying to figure out how my life had spun so wildly out of control. Every day I let this continue, the property damage worsened, my financial position weakened, and my liability grew. Patricia Williams knew exactly what she was doing, using her son as a weapon to provoke reactions, film them, escalate them, and then pounce with legal threats. But what she didn't know was that my years in insurance had taught me the most important lesson of all: documentation is everything, and the best defense is forcing your opponent to overplay their hand. The next morning, I called the security company again. Not for more cameras this time, but for a heavy-duty electronic lock system for the pool gate. It cost $300 I didn't have, charged to a credit card already screaming under the weight of unexpected expenses. But I was done playing the polite, reasonable neighbor. The technician who arrived was an older man with calloused hands and kind eyes, wearing a faded blue uniform with a security company patch. "Trouble with teenagers?" he asked while unpacking the lock system. When I explained the situation, he nodded knowingly. "You'd be surprised how often we see this. Usually it's warehouses or parking lots. Rarely a residential pool, but people get bold when they think you won't fight back." By 4 p.m., the lock was installed, heavy-duty metal housing, a 6-digit keypad, and a steel deadbolt that sank deep into the frame. He tested it 3 times, letting the satisfying click echo in the warm afternoon air before handing me the programming manual. "Change the code regularly," he advised. "And don't give it out to anyone you don't fully trust." I chose a code that meant something to me, my ex-wife's birthday, reversed. A small, private rebellion against the chaos that had swallowed my life. As I pressed the final key and heard the beep of confirmation, it felt like the first time I'd said no in months. That silence after was short-lived. From my home office window, I saw Brandon approaching the gate later that evening, phone in hand, live stream already rolling, a grin plastered across his face. He tried the handle, found it locked, and immediately his demeanor changed. He pressed buttons on the keypad with increasing frustration, yanking on the handle, glaring at the camera with exaggerated disbelief. "This crazy neighbor locked me out," he announced to his followers, his voice rising in mock outrage. The comments were already flooding in, supporting him, calling me names, offering suggestions on how to bypass the lock. Some laughed, others threatened. I watched in stunned silence as he made it sound like I had barricaded the entire neighborhood from a public resource, rather than protecting the property I had spent every penny to build. "Check this out," he said, turning the camera toward the pool shimmering in the sunset. "He actually thinks he can keep me away from the community pool." Community pool. The audacity made my blood boil. Since when was my private backyard pool a community anything? That night, the live stream escalated quickly. Brandon paced in front of the locked gate, reading comments aloud as they poured in, 20,000 viewers egging him on. "I'll show him what happens when you mess with the wrong family," he declared, his face lit by the glow of his phone screen. "Pool war finale tonight, guys," he continued, bouncing on the balls of his feet like a boxer before a fight. "This is going to be epic." People were suggesting ways to cut the lock, offering to send him tools, telling him how to slip around the fence, even offering to come over and help him take back the pool. It was like watching a digital mob gather, fueled by likes, hearts, and comments, each encouraging more escalation. From my kitchen window, I felt a growing sense of dread. What had started as a minor property dispute was morphing into something darker. Brandon wasn't just a teenager anymore, he was an influencer with an audience demanding chaos, an audience that had decided I was the villain they needed for their entertainment. And the worst part? Patricia Williams was nowhere in the videos, but I saw her silhouette behind their living room curtains, watching everything. Calm. Patient. Taking notes. She wasn't stopping Brandon, she was letting him build the narrative. Letting him push until I snapped, until she could strike with another lawsuit and clean me out like she had done to others. Then, sometime past midnight, I heard it. A loud clang, then another, as something heavy slammed against the locked gate. I reviewed the footage later, sitting alone in the dark, the glow of my laptop screen the only light in the room. Brandon had thrown a rock. Just a rock. It hadn't broken the lock or the fence, but it made a loud, deliberate clang against the metal gate, echoing across my backyard like a gunshot in the middle of the night. It wasn't meant to break anything, it was meant to send a message. "I see your lock. I'm not scared. You should be." The community's reaction to the lock was instant and intense. Some neighbors approached me quietly, heads down, their voices hushed like we were discussing forbidden things in a regime that punished dissent. "You had to do something," one neighbor, Mark from 2 houses down, whispered as we both pretended to check our mailboxes. His eyes were darting nervously toward Patricia's house across the street. "It's getting out of hand." But others? They saw the lock not as a necessary defense, but as an act of escalation. Proof that I was difficult, that I was the problem. I overheard them at the mailbox, their voices low but not low enough. He could have just talked to the Williams family. Now he's turned this into some kind of war. And maybe they were right. I didn't sleep that night. Every slam of a car door outside made me jump, thinking it was Brandon or one of his friends, coming back with tools or cans of spray paint. Every creak of the fence sounded like footsteps. Every flicker on the camera feed made me flinch. I'd won nothing. All I'd done was change the rules of the game. I kept checking the camera feeds on my phone like a man obsessed, scanning every corner of the pool area, watching for shadows, movement, anything. The lock gave me a thin illusion of security, but the reality was that it had escalated the situation far beyond what I'd imagined possible. Around midnight, I saw Brandon on camera, posting updates from his bedroom window across the street, the glow of his phone lighting up his face in the darkness. "Tomorrow morning," he announced to his followers, "I'm going to show this crazy neighbor what happens when you try to lock kids out of their own neighborhood." 15,000 people were watching him live. 15,000 strangers who only knew me as the crazy neighbor. The comments on his stream were vile, encouraging him to break the lock, cut the fence, trash my house, even hurt me if I confronted him. They called me a Karen, a boomer, a thief. And what terrified me most was that Brandon was taking them seriously. He scrolled through the comments, nodding, laughing, his eyes flickering with excitement. Every violent suggestion was met with a smirk, a nod, a maybe. And for a moment, just a moment, I wondered if I had gone too far. If I should have just taken the lock off, pretended none of this had happened, and tried to talk it out. But then I remembered the $18,000 I had spent on the pool, the hours I had spent fixing cracks, replacing filters, repairing tile. I thought about the insurance coverage that could disappear if someone got hurt while trespassing. I thought about Patricia Williams, the attorney, who had systematically destroyed 3 neighbors before me. This wasn't about teenagers wanting a pool party anymore. This was about whether I was going to let myself be the next victim. But you know what they say about hindsight. It's always 20/20ths. And I was about to learn that lesson the hard way. That same night, the night I installed the lock, Brandon announced his pool war finale to his viewers, live, with 15,000 people watching him grin at his phone and promised them a show. I should have turned off my phone, walked away, gone to bed. But I didn't. I couldn't. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash with my name painted across the front windshield. I watched from my kitchen window, lights off so he couldn't see me, as Brandon positioned his phone on a small tripod, angling it for the best view of my backyard, adjusting the lighting to capture every detail. "This crazy neighbor thinks he can keep us out of our pool," he announced to his audience, pacing back and forth, pumping himself up like a fighter before a match. "Nah, we're taking it back tonight." The comments were a blur, but the tone was clear, they wanted blood. Brandon held up a basketball, spinning it on one finger, a smug grin on his face. "We're gonna get my ball back," he said, looking straight into the camera. I blinked. I had never seen that basketball before in my life. But it didn't matter. To his viewers, the narrative was set. I had stolen his property, locked it in my backyard, and was refusing to give it back. 20,000 people were now convinced that I was a thief. I felt a sinking weight in my stomach as I watched him approach the fence, wearing old clothes he didn't mind ruining, his phone positioned perfectly to capture every angle of what was about to happen. And that's when it hit me, the lock was exactly what he wanted me to install. This had been the plan from the beginning. Push me to defend my property, escalate, make it look like I was the aggressor, and then provoke a confrontation on camera. Brandon climbed the fence while live streaming. His audience was cheering him on, throwing out suggestions on how to break in, how to mess with me, how to take back the pool. His hand gripped the chain link, pulling himself up with practiced ease. "Here we go, guys," he said into the camera, his breath quickening with excitement. And then something went wrong. Or maybe it went exactly as planned. Brandon made it over the fence, landing in my backyard, but when he realized the gate was locked and he couldn't just walk out for a triumphant exit, he decided to climb back over. That's when it happened. His foot slipped, catching in the chain link near the top, twisting awkwardly. He lost his balance, falling against the fence, screaming. "I can't get down. I can't get down," he yelled, the fear in his voice unmistakable. His phone was still recording, capturing every second. His face twisted in panic, tears forming in his eyes, his voice cracking as he screamed for help. "Mom. Mom. Help me." In that moment, every trace of teenage swagger, every ounce of performative rebellion disappeared. He was just a scared kid stuck on a fence, crying for his mother, while 20,000 strangers watched. And I'll admit it, I felt bad for him. For a brief moment, I considered going out to help him down. But I knew better. Anything I did would be on camera, twisted, edited, weaponized. That's when Patricia Williams appeared, stepping into the glow of the porch light like an actress hitting her mark. She took one look at her son, assessed the situation, and her eyes narrowed. She pulled out her phone, dialing 911 with the calm, deliberate precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "My son is trapped," she screamed into the phone, her voice high, shaking with perfectly pitched panic. "This man set a trap for children. My son is bleeding and can't get down." Trap. She was calling it a trap. My lock, a basic keypad lock on my own fence, was being framed as some kind of sinister device meant to harm children. I glanced at Brandon. I couldn't see any blood, but in the dark, with the chaos, who could tell? The way Patricia was screaming, you would have thought he'd fallen into a bear trap. "This is kidnapping," she yelled into the phone, her voice rising, carrying across the entire street. "My son was just trying to get his ball back, and this man trapped him with some kind of device." It was like watching a movie. Except this time, I was the villain, and Patricia was the heroine, saving her child from the evil neighbor. The chat on Brandon's livestream exploded with rage. People demanding justice, calling for violence, doxing my address, swearing they'd come and handle me themselves. I realized then that I had been played from the very beginning. The police arrived in 6 minutes. 3 patrol cars, lights flashing, sirens wailing, officers jumping out, hands on their belts, ready for action. Officer Reed, tall, graying, with the tired but alert eyes of a man who had seen everything, knocked on my door. "Sir, we have reports of unlawful detention of a minor," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We need to sort this out." "I have everything on camera," I said, holding up my phone like it was a shield that could protect me. But Patricia was already there, inserting herself into the conversation with the smooth authority of an attorney who knew exactly how to frame a narrative. "Don't let him manipulate you with fake videos," she said, her voice tight with righteous fury. "My son is injured and traumatized. This man deliberately set a trap to harm children." The fire department arrived to help get Brandon down, carefully untangling his foot while Patricia filmed every angle, her phone following every movement like a hawk tracking prey. Neighbors were out on their porches, phones glowing, capturing every moment for their own social media accounts, whispering to each other, glancing at me like I was a monster. Brandon was limping dramatically as they helped him down, switching which leg he was favoring every few steps, milking every second for the camera. Patricia was snapping photos of every scratch, every bruise, documenting everything meticulously. And me? I was just standing there, watching my life fall apart in real time, the villain in a story I hadn't even chosen to be part of. I knew then that Patricia Williams hadn't just won the battle. She had set the stage to win the entire war. Underscore 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 underscore. "Get his ball back," Patricia kept repeating to Officer Reed, her voice sharp, cutting through the night air like a judge's gavel. "This man stole my son's property and then set a trap when Brandon tried to retrieve it." I tried. God, I tried to speak. To explain. To insert truth into the chaos that had exploded on my front lawn under the glow of flashing police lights and the blue screens of phones recording me from every porch on the block. Every time I opened my mouth, Patricia swooped in like a courtroom hawk, her words precise, sharpened by years of legal practice, each sentence designed to overshadow mine. She had the tone of someone used to winning arguments, used to telling her story so convincingly that no one bothered to check the facts. And that was the problem. All I had were facts. Patricia had a damn narrative. I wanted to tell Officer Reed that I had never seen that basketball before, that Brandon and his friends had been using my pool for weeks without permission, that they had damaged thousands of dollars of property I couldn't afford to replace, that I was the one being targeted. I wanted to tell him that this was all on my security cameras, that I had every frame of Brandon climbing the fence, trespassing, ignoring the lock I had installed out of necessity, not malice. But every time I tried to speak, Patricia interrupted, layering her statements with legal terms that sounded like truth. "Unlawful detention, endangerment, child abuse," she said, emphasizing each word like they were confirmed charges. "Officer, we need to ensure this man faces consequences." Officer Reed looked tired, like he had handled situations like this before, like he had seen neighbors destroy each other over fences, pools, and rumors. He glanced at Patricia, then back at me. "We need to review all the evidence," he said carefully, voice low, measured. "Including your security footage, sir." That was when it hit me, everything depended on those camera files. Everything. My savings, my home, my freedom, my reputation, everything I had spent decades building could crumble if those recordings didn't show exactly what happened, and even then, if they could be twisted, misinterpreted, reframed by Patricia's narrative, I was still screwed. As I handed over the camera files, something inside me twisted. A cold, sinking feeling in my gut. Brandon's performance, the way he fell, the way he screamed, the way he started crying right on cue, his limp switching from one leg to another, all of it felt off. Rehearsed. Like he had done this before. Maybe I was wrong, maybe it was the paranoia talking after weeks of tension, but something in my gut told me I was walking into a carefully set trap, a play that had been written and directed by Patricia long before Brandon's foot caught in that fence. But I had no idea how deep it actually went until the lawsuit bomb dropped the next morning. A process server arrived at my door at 7 a.m. sharp, knocking with the calm certainty of someone who knew he was about to ruin my day, and handed me a heavy envelope. My name printed in thick, accusing letters across the top. $50,000. That's what Patricia Williams was suing me for. Not threatening. Not warning. Not negotiating. She had already filed the paperwork, stamped and sealed, county court official. I sat on my kitchen floor, cold linoleum pressing against my legs, the envelope open, 37 pages of legal jargon in my lap, flipping through the papers like an idiot, hoping page 38 would say, "Just kidding." It didn't. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of legal aggression, unlawful detention of a minor, emotional distress, child endangerment, reckless creation of dangerous conditions. Every term you can think of designed to break a person financially and mentally, every allegation crafted to paint me as a monster. It wasn't something thrown together overnight. This was a comprehensive, surgical legal attack that had been planned and drafted long before Brandon climbed my fence, long before the cameras recorded him screaming for his mother. What really terrified me was reading the damages section. I had seen numbers like this before in fraud investigations and disaster insurance claims at work, but I never imagined I would be the case. $50,000 for emotional distress. $25,000 for Brandon's ongoing therapy needs. $15,000 for medical expenses from injuries I couldn't even confirm were real. Punitive damages to be determined at trial. They were asking for enough to bankrupt me 3 times over, and the worst part? I couldn't even afford to fight it. Even if I won, the legal fees alone would bury me. It was the double trap Patricia had set for me. Criminal charges were still pending from her 911 call, and now a massive civil lawsuit was hanging over my head, timed perfectly to leave me scrambling. Every attorney I called that morning delivered the same soul-crushing consultation. This is going to cost you $30,000 to $50,000 to defend properly, one lawyer told me, voice as calm as if he were telling me the weather. Even if you win, you're looking at significant legal expenses. You may want to consider settling. Settling? With what money? My $18,000 investment into the pool was now a monument to my stupidity. It was looking like an $18,000 mistake that would cost me everything else I had. Meanwhile, Brandon's victim performance reached Academy Award levels online. He was posting daily videos about his trauma, showing off minor scratches like war wounds, his voice shaky as he explained how he couldn't sleep, couldn't trust adults, how his childhood had been destroyed by the crazy neighbor. "I think I need therapy," he said in one video, tears in his eyes, racking up thousands of likes and comments. "This crazy neighbor has completely destroyed my sense of safety in my own neighborhood." A fundraising page appeared, "Help Brandon Heal from Neighbor Attack." It raised $1,200 in the first day. And Patricia? She wasn't just attacking me legally. She was destroying my livelihood systematically. Someone created fake business pages for my small insurance consulting work, flooding them with 1-star reviews, calling me a danger to children, accusing me of entrapment and abuse. 3 clients canceled meetings after finding the videos. My face, the one I barely looked at in mirrors, was now everywhere, mummified, mocked, captions calling me Pool Trap Karen, trending locally. 2 days after the lawsuit, another process server arrived, delivering Patricia's settlement offer. She called it generous. $75,000. That's what she thought my silence was worth. What my home, my sanity, my reputation cost to make it all go away. "We are being generous," the letter stated, "considering the severity of Mr. Bell's actions and the lasting trauma inflicted on Brandon." Generous. It was more money than I had ever seen at once in my life, and they wanted it for the crime of locking my own pool gate. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think. Every knock on the door felt like another threat. Every phone call might be another client who found the videos, another loss. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation was ongoing. Officer Reed had taken my camera footage for analysis, but the process dragged on. Patricia kept calling in new complaints, noise violations when I ran my pool filter, harassment when I checked my mailbox, even a stalking report when she caught me looking out my own kitchen window. Neighbors started picking sides, and I was losing. 3 families signed a petition asking the HOA to take action against my aggressive behavior toward children. The woman who once warned me about Patricia wouldn't make eye contact anymore. Even Mark, the neighbor who told me I had done the right thing, now hurried past my house without saying hello. I was becoming a pariah in my own neighborhood. And maybe, just maybe, they were right. Maybe I had snapped. Maybe I was the story Patricia was telling, and everyone else could see it except me. The thought stayed with me. Crawled into bed with me, sat at the breakfast table, whispering. Maybe I'm the bad guy. The constant accusations and online hatred made me question everything. I spent hours reviewing the footage, hoping to find something that would clear my name, but even with clear shots of Brandon climbing the fence, getting stuck, the timeline visible, Patricia's filings claimed the footage was manipulated, edited, selective, used as evidence of intentional endangerment. Somehow, my evidence was being used against me. 3 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, I was seriously considering taking Patricia's settlement. $75,000 would ruin me, but maybe it was better than the alternative. Maybe I could sell the house, declare bankruptcy, and disappear to a small town where no one knew me as Pool Trap Karen. I scheduled a meeting with a bankruptcy attorney for the following Monday. But that weekend, something made me watch the footage again. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was the last gasp of hope. Before I surrendered, I watched Brandon's fence climb 50 times. The way he moved, the way he slipped, the way he landed just right to get stuck, how his phone's camera angle never dropped. And I realized, he knew exactly what he was doing. Exactly how to fall, how to cry, how to perform for the camera. What would you do in my situation? Would you pay up and lose everything, or would you fight? Because I was about to learn that sometimes, when you're desperate enough to keep looking, you find something that changes everything. And I was about to discover that even the most perfect trap can sometimes be turned back on the person who set it. When you're desperate enough to keep looking, you might just find something that changes everything. For 3 days straight, I did nothing but review security footage. I barely left the house, barely touched food, barely answered texts from the one friend still willing to talk to me. My neighbors probably thought I'd finally lost it for good, seeing me pacing in the living room with bloodshot eyes, curtains half closed, the glow of camera feeds flickering through the window like the last light of a sinking ship. I sat in my home office, hunched over the screen, frame by frame scrubbing through grainy night recordings, daytime clips of quiet driveways, the soft blue ripple of the pool water. It was like I was looking for a ghost, some phantom detail that would prove I wasn't the monster Patricia said I was. Because I needed to find something. Anything. Otherwise, my life was over. The breakthrough came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, a moment burned into my memory like a personal resurrection. I was reviewing footage from the week before Brandon's fence incident, building a timeline to help me reconstruct the harassment, the pool trespassing, the moments of vandalism that Patricia's lawsuit conveniently ignored. That's when I saw him. Brandon was in his backyard. But he wasn't swimming or hanging out with friends or doing normal teenage things. He was alone, phone propped against the fence, recording himself. At first, I thought maybe he was stretching. Maybe he was practicing for sports, football drills or wrestling warm-ups. But then he fell. Not a stumble, not an accident, a clean, practiced drop to the ground. Then he got up, adjusted his footing, and did it again. And again. I froze, thumb hovering over the pause button, heart beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. What the hell is he doing? I rewound. Played it again, slower. Watched him fall, roll, grab at his leg, then look at the phone, examining the playback, adjusting his angle before doing it again. Brandon was practicing falling. At first, I wanted to believe I was overreacting, reading too much into it. Maybe he was rehearsing for a school play or filming a dumb TikTok stunt. Maybe there was a harmless explanation. But then he pulled out a small makeup kit. Opened it, dipped a sponge inside, and applied red smears to his elbow, his knee, dabbing it carefully, checking in the camera to see how it looked. Fake blood. Fake bruises. I sat there, blinking, breathing hard, rewinding again, trying to process the insanity of what I was seeing. This wasn't teenage rebellion. This wasn't even aggressive HOA politics anymore. This was organized fraud, and I was the carefully chosen target. And it got worse. The next segment of footage made my blood run cold. Patricia was there. She wasn't just supervising. She was directing, standing with one hand on her hip, the other gesturing with sharp, practiced authority. I couldn't hear the audio from that distance, but I could see her lips moving, see her counting with her fingers, see her demonstrating how to hold an arm or limp convincingly. Fall faster, I imagined her saying. Cry louder. Look at the camera, Brandon. Let them see your face. It was like watching a dark, twisted theater rehearsal in slow motion, a mother coaching her son on how to fake pain, how to fake fear, how to fake being a victim. I kept digging. There were hours of this. Sessions where Brandon would climb fences, pretending to slip and get stuck, Patricia filming angles, adjusting lighting, coaching him on which cries sounded most convincing. There were clips of him practicing facial expressions, shock, pain, fear. Clips of Patricia nodding approvingly, giving a thumbs up when his performance was good enough. They practiced different scenarios. Brandon getting stuck, Brandon limping, Brandon crying, Brandon calling for help. They practiced emotions. This was premeditated. Patricia was using her own son as an instrument of extortion, and I had just stumbled into the middle of her operation. The smoking gun came from a clip 3 days before Brandon got stuck on my fence. Brandon was in his backyard, phone set up to record, going through multiple takes of falling, applying fake blood, crying out in pain, looking into the camera, wiping tears from his eyes and doing it again when it didn't look convincing enough. Multiple takes. He was practicing content for his audience. Testing which angles and lighting would get the most sympathy, which performance would sell the lie the best. And Patricia was in the background, arms crossed, phone in hand, documenting everything, timing him, critiquing him like a director coaching her star actor. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even change clothes. I paced the living room, phone in hand, waiting for dawn, waiting for the moment I could call Officer Reed without sounding like a lunatic. When the clock hit 7 a.m., I hit call. "You need to see this," I told him, my voice shaking with relief and rage. "I found something. It changes everything." He agreed to come over that morning. I spent the next 3 hours organizing clips, building a timeline, making notes, ready to explain exactly what each segment showed. My hands were shaking, but I felt clarity for the first time in weeks. This was my chance to prove I wasn't the monster Patricia had painted me to be. When Officer Reed arrived, he looked tired, but he listened, patient, focused, as I walked him through the footage. The practice sessions. The coaching. The makeup applications. The emotional rehearsals. His expression grew darker with each clip. "This changes everything," he said quietly, after watching Brandon's falls on repeat. "We're looking at fraud here. Insurance fraud, false police reports, conspiracy to commit fraud. This is a serious criminal operation." Within days, the digital forensics team recovered deleted content from Brandon's social media and phone. Messages to friends bragging about getting this racist's house, screenshots of internet tutorials about faking injuries for views, even a planning document outlining the steps to make him pay without going to court. They had researched my financials, my insurance coverage, my employment. They knew exactly who I was, how much I could afford, how much pressure it would take to break me. I was targeted because they thought I was weak. When confronted with the evidence, Brandon broke. The teenager with the online swagger, 50,000 followers cheering him on, disappeared in an instant, replaced by a scared kid who realized how deep he was in. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," he sobbed to Officer Reed, shoulders shaking, tears real this time. "Mom said we needed money for college. She said this guy was crazy, that he deserved it." He was crying, voice cracking, cheeks blotchy. It wasn't the performance I'd seen on social media. This was real. The fear. The regret. The realization that his mother had used him like a pawn. The media attention was instant. News vans rolled in by noon, local reporters asking neighbors for statements. Some eagerly gave interviews, retelling how they had believed Patricia's stories, how they had signed petitions against me, how they had called me paranoid for locking my pool and checking my cameras. Others stayed silent, shuffling back into their homes, realizing how easily they had been fooled. That evening, the headline read, "HOA President and Son Arrested in Elaborate Insurance Fraud Scheme." For the first time in months, I wasn't the villain in everyone's eyes. Patricia's law practice collapsed within a week. Other victims, emboldened by her arrest, came forward with their stories: false slip-and-fall claims, fake damage reports, exaggerated emotional distress suits. The state bar opened an investigation into her professional conduct. Her position as HOA president was terminated in an emergency meeting, the same neighbors who had once praised her efficiency now calling her a disgrace to the community. It was astonishing how fast a life built on manipulation could crumble. Brandon's punishment was different. The judge who handled his case was patient, not cruel, but firm in a way that made every word feel heavy. "You're going to learn what it takes to keep a pool safe," she told him during sentencing. "You're going to understand the value of other people's property, and the trust you've broken in this community." His sentence was community service, specifically at local pools, assisting with maintenance and safety programs. It wasn't about punishing him alone, it was about making him face what he had disrupted, about teaching him the responsibility he'd never been taught. 6 months later, there was a knock on my door. I froze, expecting another solicitor, another lingering problem from this nightmare. But it was Brandon. He wasn't there to cause trouble, or to demand anything. He stood on my porch in a plain t-shirt, a service vest, hands nervously twisting a cap. "Mr. Bell," he said quietly, "part of my community service is pool maintenance. I was wondering if I could help you. For everything I did." I didn't answer at first. The old anger stirred, reminding me of every sleepless night, every cancelled client, every moment I thought I was losing my mind. But as I looked at him, I didn't see the entitled kid with 50,000 followers. I saw a young man, shoulders hunched under the weight of lessons painfully learned, eyes that no longer held the smug defiance of youth, but the humility of someone who had seen consequences and survived. I stepped aside and let him in. That summer, Brandon and I cleaned filters, checked chemical balances, patched small leaks, and scrubbed tile lines. He learned how to test pH levels, how much chlorine was safe, how to handle safety protocols to prevent drownings. One afternoon, while he was skimming leaves from the surface, he looked up, sweat on his brow. "I never realized how much work this was," he admitted. "When I was just jumping in, making videos, I thought it was just there, you know? I didn't think about what it took to keep it clean or safe." He paused, looking into the water, then back at me. "You ever gonna forgive me?" I didn't have an answer ready. I just handed him the pool skimmer. That was enough. Healing in the community took longer. Neighbors who had once avoided me started offering awkward greetings again. A few apologized directly, admitting they had jumped to conclusions, swept along by Patricia's manufactured outrage. Others simply stopped crossing the street to avoid me, and that was apology enough. At the annual neighborhood barbecue that fall, people waved me over, offered me a plate, asked about the pool. It was the first time in a year I felt like I was part of the community again. Patricia moved away 3 months after her arrest, her house sold quietly to a family who kept to themselves. Last I heard, she was practicing law in another state, likely searching for the next place to test the limits of ethics and the gullibility of strangers. But that was no longer my concern. I had my own life to focus on, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like mine again. 1 year later, there's a sign by my pool that reads, "Community welcome. Please ask." It's funny, really. The whole mess started over access to a pool. But it wasn't about the pool. It was about the fear of the knock at the door, the panic when a neighbor's narrative turns the street against you, the silence that fills your home when you don't know who to trust. Now, at least, people knock. The pool lock is still there. Old habits die hard, and after everything, I'm not ready to remove it. But there's a process now. A conversation. An understanding that trust is something we build, not something we demand. The cameras are still rolling, by the way. Not because I'm paranoid, not anymore, but because documentation saved my life. I learned the hard way that if you ever have to defend yourself, having the truth on video is the best shield you can have. Ironically, it was Brandon who suggested I keep them. "Evidence protects everyone," he said, carefully inspecting the security camera casing to ensure it was weather-sealed properly. And honestly, he was right. So that's the story. The HOA Karen's son who called 911 after I locked my pool. And yes, like the title promised, he left in handcuffs for trespassing, multiple counts. But what the title doesn't tell you is that 6 months later, he came back to help me clean the pool he once broke into. Turns out, the kid has a good heart under all the entitlement his mother built up in him. The pool's still there, still locked, but now there's that sign. Community welcome. Please ask. Because I learned that sometimes you have to lock your pool to unlock the truth. And sometimes, the best investment you can make isn't in your home, your pool, or your security system. It's in your own dignity, in your willingness to stand up for yourself even when the world is calling you crazy. The $18,000 I thought I wasted on that pool? It turned out to be the tuition fee for the most important lesson I've ever learned. Standing your ground is worth it, even when it feels like everyone is against you. And the cameras are still rolling. By the way, if you made it this far, thanks for sticking with me through this chaos. Would you have handled it the same way? Or would you have just sold the house and moved to Alaska to get away from HOA drama for good? I'd love to hear your take in the comments. And if stories like this, real, raw, suburban chaos, speak to your soul, hit that subscribe button. Here on QA Stories, we post true stories every week, stories that remind you it's okay to stand your ground, to document your truth, and to fight for your peace. From all of us here, thanks for watching. Smash that like button, drop your thoughts below, and join us again next week for another story that will make you question just how far neighbors will go, and what you're willing to do when the knock comes at your door. The end.